March 2025 marks the 50th anniversary of the final NCAA men's basketball championship won by UCLA coaching great John Wooden. He retired immediately after defeating Kentucky in the final, having won 10 championships in 12 years, an accomplishment unprecedented and unlikely ever to be matched again. On Thursday, March 6, 2025, I interviewed Pete Turgevich, a starter on that 1975 team, and John Wooden's son, Jim Wooden. I talked with Pete about his memories of that 74-75 Bruins season, and then I also talked with him about Indiana high school basketball, since both he and I grew up in Indiana, as did John Wooden. John Wooden's son, Jim Wooden, provided some insights into his father's legacy. Here now are both of those interviews, starting with Pete Turgevich, then going into the interview with Jim Wooden, here on Saturday Sportsline Memories.
Yeah, Mike, I'm here.
Hey, Pete, thank you for calling back, and I sincerely appreciate your time and in this. Then I'll start the questions right off here. The 1974-75 UCLA basketball season turned out to be Coach Wooden's last season. Did you or anybody on the team have any inkling that it actually would be?
Yeah, Dave Myers, my roommate, his mom was kind of close with Coach Wooden's wife, Nell, and he had indicated later in the year that he felt this might be Coach Wooden's last year. I don't know if it was something that Nell had shared with his mother or how this was, but I know Dave had brought it up. To tell you, I never really thought about it. It was our last year also, and we were, just trying to win a championship. And but we did. I know at least Dave and I did. I'm not sure anybody else on the team really thought that was going to be his last year.
Okay, I can imagine there was a lot of frustration, Pete, from the previous year's national semifinal loss to a North Carolina State team that you'd beaten in the regular season in 73-74. What was the overall team attitude going into the 1974-75 season?
Well, yeah, it was. The loss was devastating for us. We went to UCLA thinking we might never lose a game, let alone a championship. So, I could just tell you, after we lost, Andre McCarter came up to me in the locker room and said, "We need to get this back, or we will get this back." That's how he put it. He said, "We will get this back." And so our attitude was to get back what we had lost, and we never ever thought that we weren't going to do it. Although we were a very young team, Dave and I were the only seniors. Of course, Andre had redshirted, so he was basically a senior. So there was three of us, but we had, a couple of young guys on the team that were tremendous players, but yet they were still young.
The 74-75 regular season, Pete, went pretty well record-wise. 23-3 overall, 12-2 in the Pac-8. You won the Pac-8. But in the tournament, you received several challenges: a 3-point win against Montana, plus 2 overtime games, one against Michigan in the opening round, then against Louisville in the national semifinal, a 1-point nail-biter. So, in your opinion, Pete, what was the key to this team, the 74-75 team, being able to hold up against all that pressure and beat Kentucky for the title versus the previous year's team that had fallen in the national semifinal to NC State?
Well, totally different stories. The team in '74, in my opinion, could have possibly been the most talented team in the history of college basketball. Was when you think about Bill Walton was a senior. He was the best college basketball player he was ever going to be. Jamal Wilkes was a senior, 2-time, both of them were 3-time All-Americans, 3-time academic All-Americans. Dave Myers was a future All-American, but he was a junior. He also had a lot of playing time. That was our front line, and I think that front line was something that I don't know if anybody could ever match again. So actually, I thought we had more talent there. But going back into the '75 team, one of the things that And Dave Myers had shared this with me one time, and he called us the team without. And I said, the team without what? And he said, well, early on it was Gail Goodrich and Walt Hazard, and then it was, Wicks and Rowe, and then it was, then it was Al Cinder, and then it was Wicks and Rowe, and then it was the Walton gang. Now, we didn't really have that. So I think that led to our uh, a difficult time matching up with us because they never knew who was going to have what game at that time. I don't know if I'm describing it, but anybody at any time could have a big game. It could have been a valuable resource to the outcome. As far as the closeness of the games, yeah, I'll tell you, I didn't think I know we didn't play that well against Michigan, and that was upsetting at halftime. And then obviously we almost lost the game if C.J. Kupak had hit that jump shot. The Louisville game was just a tremendous game. We felt that Louisville was definitely the second best team in the country. We think that they would have beaten Kentucky had they gotten there, which would have been tremendous for the Louisville program because Kentucky refused to play them back in those days. It was Kentucky had nothing to gain by playing Louisville, and then the Montana game. Montana just played an outstanding game. We had to match their play, and so yeah, we did come up with big plays at the right time, and we were fortunate enough to come out as national champions.
I saw, and I'm going to put a link to it in the description. I saw a 4-point or 4-part, I should say, a 4-part series that a young man, I take it at the time, a student at East Chicago Central, had done with you. 4-part interview. This was 12, 13 years ago, and I watched that before I contacted you. Some great insights about your whole career. And what life lessons did you learn, Pete, from Coach Wooden?
Uh, that's a question that's asked so many times because of Coach Wooden's reputation. But my story was different. Uh, I, I I had a great father. I had great parents who, they showed me. I didn't go to UCLA to, learn how to live life. I didn't go there to learn how to be a man. I already had that at home. I went there to be coached by a great coach, and so I could see how others might look at that and say, this is what we took from Coach Wooden and the lessons that he taught. But as far as I was concerned, I felt that Coach Wooden had just reiterated what was taught by my father. And like I say, Coach Wooden was a great coach, but he wasn't. To me, my father was a great father. So I didn't really need that from him. But one thing I could tell you that my feelings about Coach Wooden is he walked the walk. He lived the life he preached. It wasn't anything, and he didn't preach it. I shouldn't even use that term because he gave us the option. He just uh, uh, we were given the option to choose whether to follow or not, and obviously. He's a great man, and he did a lot of things, and he followed his life like his pyramid of success, taught.
In that series of interviews with the young man 12, 13 years ago, you mentioned a story about wanting to go to Notre Dame, and then a coaching change occurred. I think that's when Digger Phelps came in and Johnny D left. And I just wondered, since we're both from Indiana, had you ever, after Notre Dame fell through, did you give any thought about Purdue or IU going there?
Yeah, I had my mind set on going to Notre Dame. I actually was en route traveling like 10 minutes before I got to my official visit that Johnny D had announced his resignation. Had his assistant coach gotten the job, I would have still gone there. Digger Phelps didn't want me to, and I'm not knocking Digger Phelps' decision. He used to bring in all the guys from the East Coast, especially the Washington D.C. area at that time, and he brought in Gary Brokaw in place of me, and Gary Brokaw was a tremendous player. So, I have no arguments about that. To be honest with you, I never considered Purdue or IU, and and this might sound silly at this time, but I was 6'6", 170, 175 pounds maybe, and back then the Big Ten was known as like I think the Black and Blue Conference, where it was very physical, and I didn't think that my game fit a physical game because of my physique, and so I didn't think I wanted to really play in more of a league that was more of a finesse league and not a physical league. So I never really considered it any Big Ten school for that matter.
You had an impressive high school career at East Chicago, Washington. And in fact, I saw you at Mackey Arena with your East Chicago, Washington teammates in the 71 semi state at Purdue. You went on to win the state championship. And, excuse me, your Senators put out my late father's high school team, Rossville, allowing EC Washington to advance to the tournament's Final Four. You also had some very notable teammates, as it turned out. Tim Stoddard, who went to North Carolina State, became a longtime relief pitcher in the major leagues. Junior Bridgman, he was known as Ulysses back then. And he went on to have a great career in pro basketball and now a very successful businessman. So many great teams that I remember from my youth in living in Indiana. Gary Roosevelt winning the 68 championship, and then in 70, East Chicago Roosevelt, and then yourselves in 71, and then Gary West, I remember advancing to the final game before falling to Connorsville in 72. What is your favorite memory of your East Chicago, Washington experience, Pete?
Hey, don't forget about Gary Tolston in 1969, only losing the state championship by 3 points to George McGinnis in Indianapolis, Washington. That was a pretty good run too with that team.
Okay, yes, I did forget it. That was in the afternoon, wasn't it?
No. That was a championship game.
Oh, it was. Okay.
They lost the championship game, yeah. So that was a really good team too. So that era of up in northwest Indiana was really something. But what was the question about?
Well, what was your favorite memory of your experience playing with East Chicago, Washington?
Well, there were so many good games that played against difficult teams, and one of the things that our schedule interpreted to us was that we had to play these teams on the road. So we went into like Gary Westside at that time was rated number 2 in the state, and we were number 1, and we had to go in and beat them at the end of the regular season on their own court, and then we had to go in a couple weeks later and play them for the regional championship on their own court. So I think a lot of those memories. One of my fondest memories was going into Michigan City, Elston, and playing against Rick Whitlow and Albert Fleming, and the score was 56-51 at halftime. And I'm looking at some scores of yesterday's or Tuesday's sectional games, and the final scores are in the 40s. So when you think about that game being a halftime score of a high school basketball game of 16 minutes, that was really something. And I got to tell you this: I always brag about how I held Rick Whitlow to 36 that night.
And for our younger listeners, there was no 3-point shot back in the day. 3-point
Nope.
shot did not exist. So an extraordinarily high scoring game back then.
Yes.
Yeah, really remarkable time for, as we Hoosiers call it, the region, that 5-year span there from 68 through 72.
I got to throw in one more thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
1966, East Chicago, Washington was in the final and made it to the Final Four. They lost in the afternoon game to Michigan City, the eventual state champions.
Yeah, Michigan City, as I recall, beat Indianapolis Tech in the championship game that night. So,
correct.
Yeah,
Yes.
I remember watching that game, and I had rooted for Tech all the time, and I was rather upset I couldn't. It got to the point where I couldn't even watch the game anymore. But so be it.
And in '62, we lost the championship game, and in '60, that was the year I was 7 years old. That was the year that set me off when East Chicago, Washington won the state championship in 1960. I fell in love with the sport, and that's it. But I got to tell you something. I was fortunate enough last Saturday to be in Mackey Arena, and I've got a picture with Rick Mount. And the first thing Rick Mount said to me was, hey, you remember, he said, let's talk about John Barato. And he talked about one of our players hanging on the rim at the end of the game, and no goaltending was called, and they lost it, how he was catching cramps, and they took him out, put him in, and it was so great that Rick Mount was relating that memory to me at that time. It just happened just last Saturday because I went to the UCLA Purdue game.
I watched that game on TV, and I saw a crowd shot of Rick Mount, and I remembered him from his days at Purdue, following him. What a deadeye he was from the floor all over the place, making shots. That Purdue team with Mount actually got to as you know, the '69 championship game, and then lost to UCLA and Lou Alcindor, as he was known, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, in the final by 20 points, as I recall. But those were some great Purdue teams with George King, and I was able to see a few of those games, not many, when we were living in West Lafayette, but great memories, and it's good to know that Rick Mount is still around and apparently healthy, and I was glad to see that.
When I left him, I said, Rick, I feel like it's an honor to just be in the same gymnasium with you. And he's such a humble guy that he said, oh, you were good, like that. And I said, no, I was no Rick Mount. And as far, in my opinion, he's second only to Oscar Robertson as the greatest players come out of Indiana.
I agree. And one other thing I wanted to talk about, Pete, before I let you go. I think, I wish that, and I think it's impractical nowadays, but I wish that Indiana would have retained the one-class system in the state tournament. And I know there are comments about, smaller schools would never have a chance now because of consolidation that took place in the 60s. The bigger schools are even bigger now. Blah, blah, blah. But I still like the romance of the 1954 Milan team with Bobby Plump, and I talked with him a few months ago. That interview is up on my Saturday Sportsline Memories channel. But your thoughts about the one-class system versus what Indiana has now?
When I went out to UCLA, and then we were talking about high school basketball, and they were amazed that every single team, no matter what their record was in the state, got to play in the state tournament, and it was one big tournament with all these teams, and it was something special. Obviously, I'm a one-class system guy. I like the one-class system, but I did read an article of quite a few years ago, and they talked about how the one-class system was losing money, and it just wasn't something that could be sustained. So I kind of saw both sides. But nowadays, when you look at the games, there's nobody in the stands anyway, so I don't know how they're making money nowadays. So as far as supporting of the one-class system, I mean, I know guys that are still talking about today when they beat a certain team and upset a certain team in the sectional or won a sectional. It just, I don't know. To me, like if you win a 3A championship, you're really not the state champion. You're the 3, which is true. And I just consider the 4A champion the best team in the state, and I think that's fair enough.
And one other question I wanted to ask to you, Pete, going back to that 71 East Chicago Washington team, and I'm a little bit prejudiced because I saw you guys in the semi-state at Purdue back in 71, and of course you played for the East Chicago Washington team in 71 that won the state championship. But I've thought, among the single class champions, my thought is that East Chicago Washington is, if not the best single class champion of all time in Indiana high school state basketball. They've got to be among the top 3. I mean, if you talk about teams that might have been better than you for one season, I guess the only ones I could come up with possibly would be the 55 and 56 Addicts teams with Oscar Robertson on them. What are your thoughts on where East Chicago Washington stands in that pantheon?
Oh, just be in the conversation is such a compliment to us, and we really appreciate any time. I think it's difficult to pick a championship team, the all-time greatest, but just to mention us is unbelievable. One of the things that it's something that happens with super teams is Junior, Timmy, and myself. We got a lot of the credit, but our guards, Adel and Bailey, were so good. I could tell you stories like Adel never played football in his life, and the Dallas Cowboys drafted him out of college. That's the kind of athlete he was. Ruben Bailey, the guys at Montana told me, because he went there for 1 year, told me that they felt he was the best guard to set foot on their court, and that's Judd Heathcote was the coach back then. And don't forget, a couple of years later, they had Michael Ray Richardson, who ended up one of the top draft choices in the NBA, and they thought Ruben was better. So I mean, those guys didn't get the credit that they deserve. So saying all that, obviously, we were good athletes, really good athletes. We were good basketball players, but we played together very well. The system fit us, especially me. I was lucky enough to be on the receiving end of the system. And but one thing I do want to mention, I don't know what it was like for Oscar Robertson's team in there, but I know they mentioned, like, say, Indianapolis, Washington with George McGinnis and Steve Downing. But one thing that I think that we should have the nod on is that every one of us was born in the same hospital. Every one of us grew up in the same city. And East Chicago is not that big of a city. Except for me, every one of them went to the public school system. I went to the parochial school system until ninth grade. And so I think when you talk about Hoosier hysteria and great teams, I think that should be added. And not to knock Indianapolis, Washington, but George McGinnis came from Alabama. Dad had a job offer and moved this thing. So it wasn't like, he grew up in the area and obviously a tremendous basketball player.
Well, Pete, thank you very much for your time. I will strive to have this posted today, and it'll be up on the Saturday Sportsline Memories channel. And I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me, and some great memories of watching you and your two and other teammates, the two biggies, of course, Stoddard and Bridgman, and of course Bailey and Adele, as you mentioned. So wonderful times, and Pete, all the best to you and yours.
Hey, I just got to mention, Saturday we're having a 50-year reunion, because the reason for your phone call, for the UCLA championship. But this is going to be a rare moment, I think, because it's very difficult or very rare for two teams to be honored at the same time. But we're actually having three teams honored. The 65 team won the national championship, the 75 team won the national championship, and 30 years ago the 95 team won the national championship. So it's going to be a three-team reunion. I doubt if that's ever happened before and ever happened again.
I would agree, and I will strive to take a look at that on Big Ten Network or some other network. I would love to see that.
Yeah, I can't believe I'm going to a Big Ten game, UCLA against USC.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on this whole thing about UCLA, USC, Oregon, and Washington moving to the Big Ten?
I watched the game the other day. I think it was Oregon against Rutgers, and it was a Big Ten game. I understand it's the money thing. It's a business and it's the money thing, but it's just kind of destroyed the way it was with the regional rivalries and the regional conferences. So I'm not a big fan of it. I know Bill Walton wasn't a big fan of it because now the Conference of Champions does not exist anymore. So I'm not a big fan of that.
Yeah, and I'm not either. And some younger folks might say we're sticks in the mud, but you know what? That's what we grew up with. That's what we enjoyed, and so be it. So I'm with you. Well, Pete, thank you very much for your time today. I certainly appreciate your calling back.
All right, thank you.
Bye-bye. 1974 and 75 was your dad's final season at UCLA, and then he retired. Did you or any other family members have an inkling that 74-75 would be your father's last season?
No.
Okay. As I recall, that he made the announcement that I guess, before the game against Kentucky. So that would have been, I guess, the first time you found out about it.
Yes.
Your father,
Played in San Diego.
yep, I remember that game quite well, watching it on NBC. Your father also created what he called a pyramid of success, having to do with matters of self-control, behavior, determination, perseverance, and so forth. But the pyramid wasn't just for basketball players, but for all people. And I wondered, Jim, how did the pyramid of success that your dad developed help you in your work career?
Well, I think in a lot of ways, he had worked on that over years and years and years, and kept changing it, and then when he retired, um, his first 2 years of retirement, he made more money just speaking on the pyramid than he did in a lifetime of teaching and coaching.
That's pretty
And
incredible when you think about it.
yeah, and Dad was always wanted to be known as a teacher, a teacher of life and then a teacher of basketball also, and he did pretty well at both.
Yes, he did. Did some of the lessons that he put forth help you in any way?
Oh, sure they did. I just, everything on just, to fulfill me, and just different things in it, but being honest and just, and do your best and all this. It's just, you got. I'm 88, and my memory's lousy, but
I hear you.
he his pyramid of success was a wonderful thing, and it was and he worked on it from when he started in college. He worked on it actually through his teaching career, and even he still hadn't finished it when he went to UCLA.
I grew up in Indiana, as your dad did. In fact, if I recall, your dad grew up on a farm, and so did I. And his career, as mine did, took twists and turns outside of our home state. I've always had a fond place for Indiana, and as I said, I get back there regularly. Did your father ever express to you or to your mother when he was at UCLA any desire to go back, if not to Indiana, at least to the Midwest?
No, he really didn't. I mean, if he did, he didn't do it to Mom or didn't do it to any of us. But I know that you knew that story about how he accepted UCLA.
Yes. Yes, he had actually, if I recall, he had actually received an offer from Minnesota, but it got there late because he had already accepted the offer at UCLA, and he couldn't. Yeah, he couldn't.
Well, the reason was he wanted to stay in the Midwest, but the coach that he was replacing at Minnesota was a classmate of his at Purdue, and he wanted when they called him to give him the job, he said, "I want to make sure that he is given an equal job in the university and equal pay." And the athletic director told him, yes, he didn't think that would be a problem, but he had to go to the chancellor to get the permission. And then again, Dad said, "Well, whoever calls me back first, I'll accept, and I won't go back on my word."
Mm-hmm.
But I do know, after we arrived here and he saw the situation in UCLA, he wished he hadn't accepted.
Well, it was a
Well,
long
there was
climb up. It took him, what,
oh,
16 years, I think, to get the first
there,
championship.
and they had wrestling on one end of the basketball court and gymnastics on the other end of the basketball court during his practices. But he never ever complained after that one time. Just stuck it out.
And your father's final championship in 1975, Jim, was a nice cap to his career, especially after having lost in the national semifinal against North Carolina State the previous year. Did he ever tell you what his favorite championship team was at UCLA? He had 10 of those to choose from.
No, he really never did. But I think think his first one was.
The one back in '64,
He
then.
didn't have a player over 6'4", and I've heard him say many times, the coaches that he likes, he hopes they can win at least one championship, but no more.
Uh huh.
Because they expect you to win after you win,
Yeah,
But
that's true.
I would say, but he never really said it. Just like he never really said who his favorite player was, but I kind of know who it was.
Uh huh.
But he never said it, and I do think it was the first team.
That's
Slaughter, and
uh huh. It's been 15 years almost since your father's passing. It's coming up on now 50 years since his last championship. What are your, Jim, your favorite memories of your dad, and how would you like him to be remembered in history?
Well, I was able to through my work. I was in sales, and through my work, and because of the computer life now, I was able to spend 2 days a week with my dad in his condo in Encino. And then we had other caregivers and everything, but I was able to spend 2 days a week with him, and probably was the most time I ever spent with my father, because when you're growing up, you always think you know more than your parents know, And then when I graduated from high school, I was a pretty decent basketball player. We won a city championship twice, but not good enough for a big college, and didn't have a grades enough to get into UCLA anyway. But then I went in the Marine Corps right off the bat. But I think my what the question again was.
Well, I was going to say if some of your favorite memories of your father, and then what do you think his legacy should be? How would you like him to be remembered?
Well, what I remember a lot was his patience.
Uh huh.
And Dad loved people. He loved to see people. His condo in Encino was open to anybody that wanted to come. They'd call him and say, "Hey, Coach, we're out here from Indiana or Michigan, or any chance to come over and say hello?" Shaking your hand, and he'd say, "Come on over." And just things like that, and how gracious he was to people. Oh, he never, he learned this all from his father, Joshua Hugh.
Uh huh.
Who always said, if you don't have something good to say about something, don't say anything at all. And he really followed that philosophy. I mean, my dad really, really did practice what he preached.